This conference will now be recorded.
Hello everyone, and welcome back. I'm delighted to welcome back our panel for this extended question and answer session following on from our August PCA support group meeting. So we're hopefully going to chat through some of the questions that we didn't manage to get through on the day. And just a thank you to all of you who have submitted them, because I'm sure for every question that's submitted, it's then relevant to many other members. So yeah, great. Thanks to you all for submitting them. And just to reintroduce the panel, so we have, and if you wouldn't mind giving us a wave, panelists, when I get to you. So we have Seb Crutch, who lots of you will know, who is the RDS co-lead, clinical psychologist and professor of neuropsychology at the Dementia Research Centre at UCL. And we also have Dr. Ross Patterson, who is senior clinical research fellow and honorary consultant neurologist at UCL as well. We have Livy Wood, who is a member of the RDS Direct Support Team and Impact Study Research Team. And we have Martina Davis, who is a RDS member who was diagnosed with PCA last year. And also Valerie Mansfield, who is an RDS member who cared for her late husband, Peter, who had PCA. Okay, so the first question we're going to kick off with was about how lockdown has forced many of us to find new ways to carry on with our daily activities. But we know that that's something that people with PCA have to do continually to adapt to changes and challenges over time. And Val and Martina, I just wondered if you would be able to share some of the ways you've adapted activities to make them easier, whether that's during lockdown or previously. Could I come to you first, Val? Would that be okay?
Yes, certainly. I don't have the experiences of lockdown, obviously, but I think some of the activities we tried to adapt were things like singing, where we might have done things with a bigger group, and obviously all these things change now anyway. And then we'd be singing at home or listening to music. Dancing, we used to go dancing quite a lot, doing jazz, jive and Lindy Hop. Ended up doing that in our kitchen because sequencing and orientation was quite difficult in the end. Watching television, even though the buttons couldn't be used or controlled, tried to make sure that Peter could actually be involved in highlighting. I would highlight the programs he wanted to watch or see, or the films, so that he was making the decisions, even if he couldn't physically highlight things. So that seemed to work quite well. We were fortunate to have a good network of family and friends, so they were able to come and take us out at times where we perhaps needed, more than just myself to help Peter go out to do things that we wanted to do. Watching rugby, again, some of those sports are still not yet live. And things like dressing, and I don't know if this is appropriate here, but initially labelling the shelves for where all the clothes were. And then when that became difficult to read the labels or to understand where those were, laying them out on the bed in the order. And I know Martina said last time about numbering her makeup as she did that. And I did try doing the numbers, but somehow the numbers got muddled up at times. So that wasn't always very successful. But trying to order the order that you put clothes in, and then actually, obviously, eventually helping Peter to get dressed. So some of those activities are just a few things that we found we could adapt and adjust. As with everything on the PCA daily level, it's quite challenging to think of new things, but I know Martina will have some more recent experience.
Thank you, Val. And yes, Martina, did you want to add to that with any examples?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Val has said is true, and I've had to apply it to my own daily life. But constantly having to problem solve anyway, lockdown did and didn't make a huge amount of difference to me, because I've got to do those things anyway. But if we look at things like my photography, where a big adaptation I had to make was I was unable to carry around big 600mm lenses, was unable to climb mountains and stuff like that because of the terrain, and footholds and everything's become difficult for me, sorry. But one of the biggest adaptations I made, and I've just done this recently after looking at all this stuff and getting a bit despondent, was to actually go along to a local camera shop who were really, really kind and supportive, and I come away with a 250mm lens, smaller lenses that I can now stick in my coat pockets. I've got a local book where it's all flat walking and circular routes, which are for anybody that's physically challenged. And of course, I still go out with my SOS button, which I purchased from a mountaineering shop. So I don't see that I've got to have it because I've got PCA. That's not being in denial. I just think it's a sensible thing to have with me. So all of those adaptations in life I've had to make prior to lockdown. But now that we're sort of half coming out of it, it's all those things enabling me to really start living my life again with PCA and doing the things I really, really enjoy doing. And things like misseeing where my fingers were, and using knives, and well, that looks like a bit of nail there, oops, we don't want that going in anybody's macaroni cheese, do we? So my OT, we worked together, and we came up with things like finger guards. So I love cooking, and that's helped me to not have to give up something that I really, really love. So there's lots of adaptations. If you approach them with a sort of a blank canvas vision, if you like, there's lots of things that you can do that you've got in your house. Don't let it drag you down. You can change things, and you can still do the things that you want to do. I know that depends on what stage you're at in your diagnosis. I fully appreciate that. But this also perhaps can help the person that's looking after and supporting the person with a diagnosis to perhaps take a different approach to how they see things. So there's two people kind of working on it. I hope that helps.
So helpful, thank you, Martina. And I think the different range of activities that you've both covered there just really captures that the sorts of things that people want to be carrying on doing vary hugely, but some of these strategies and problem solving can apply across different activities. So it will be, I'm sure, really helpful what you've shared today. And also in terms of you mentioning, Martina, the other people you've reached out to, or maybe how partners can help, and even those professionals in the camera shop, that's a really nice example of reaching out and having some positive support from others. So thank you for sharing that. This was a question directed to you, Val, if that's okay, but I also wondered if we could come to you as well, Ross, for some input. So it's asking if you found that drugs or alternative treatments such as turmeric and other things have provided help with PCA.
Thank you, Emma. The only drug that Peter was involved with on a regular basis was the rivastigmine patches. He didn't have any other drugs until he was actually hospitalised. So, and I have to say, I think it sort of helped, although I'm not quite sure what to compare it to. But I think it did perhaps made him feel a bit more balanced and even, rather than these big dips and troughs. But I don't know enough about the clinical side of it, so Ross will probably be able to explain that a bit better. Turmeric, I certainly we didn't use for that particular treatment for PCA. But there were, when you say alternatives, not treatments, but I think some of the social alternatives that I've covered before, we still continue to do. Once shaving became difficult, because Peter couldn't really use his razor very well, and I was getting a bit alarmed. I know they're safety razors. And then we went on to a battery razor. And then eventually I thought, this would be nice if he goes to the barbers. And having had his wife cut his hair for 40 odd years, he then ended up going to have hot, I would say, alternative therapies, hot flannels on his face, much better deal than having me cutting his hair for that length of time, and also going to the podiatrist as well. So some of the alternative things actually didn't necessarily involve drug treatments, but I consider those as alternative therapies actually. So thank you. I know Ross will give you more information.
So there's I guess 3 elements to that question. So First of all, there's the symptomatic treatment, so to make people feel better and to manage the symptoms of PCA better. And then there's drugs that will alter the course of PCA and the underlying disease, of which there aren't any, but there are promising signs. And then there's the alternative medications. So starting off with the symptomatic treatments, as Val mentioned, rivastigmine is one. There's a drug called donepezil and there's a drug called memantine. And broadly speaking, they work in a similar way. And they don't alter the course of the disease, but what they do is make the nerve cells that are there work a bit more efficiently. So it boosts the chemical that the nerve cells use to talk to one another so that they can work as well as they can do under the circumstances. And these are not wonder drugs, and often people don't notice any dramatic difference, but we expect to see in some people a marginal improvement in their memory and thinking scores. These are drugs that can be associated with some symptoms. So if people find the symptoms are worse than the improvement, then you can stop them and see if it makes a difference. So that's my usual approach to managing these symptomatic treatments. And then the second element of this is the disease modifying drugs. So that's drugs that actually change the course of PCA. And unfortunately, we don't have anything robust to tell you at the moment, but there is one drug for Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common protein disease that underlies PCA. There is one drug that seems to have some benefit, and it's just going through the process of extended clinical trials. So there is definitely hope in that regard for people in future with this condition. And then the third element of this will be the alternative medications. And I think there aren't, so as doctors, in order to prescribe or recommend a medication, we have to have really good evidence to show that that works. And in order to say that a treatment definitely has benefit, you need to have people that have the treatment and those who don't have the treatment, and the doctors and scientists need to be blinded to that, and so they don't know who's getting what. And then you need to be able to demonstrate benefit. And for most of these alternative therapies, there is no such evidence. And so people are just doing it on a sort of trial and error basis. And yes, there are papers in the literature suggesting improvement, but I think you need to really analyze these critically. And if my view on these is that if the product is safe, if it doesn't have dangerous side effects, and if people aren't asking you for lots of money and trying to rip you off, then it's reasonable to try those if you wish. But I think it's important to realise that there's very little evidence for most of these things.
Thank you, Ross. That's really, really helpful. The next question is to you, Val, if that's okay, asking how you and Peter selected walks that Peter was able to do as his ability to navigate uneven terrains and steps, etc., deteriorated.
Yes, thank you. We used to do quite a lot of walking across the hills and, quite a lot of outdoor walking. But sometimes trail paths and things became a little bit more difficult and slowed Peter down. He wasn't sure about it. So we started to do a little bit more local walking, town walking. We still went out on the hills, but we had to then look quite carefully to see if we can find more defined trails. So actually sometimes distinguishing between where your feet were on the trail and the edge might look as if you're actually going over an edge when it wasn't actually there. So we did adapt that quite a lot. I have to say I did notice the quite significant difference in the height of curbs in town when we were walking into town, much more so than I ever had done before, even when I had young children. And on a couple of occasions when Peter had tripped up over these extremely steep curbs, I thought, oh, we mustn't go down that route again. So sometimes I think I hadn't paid enough attention, but I became more aware of that. So then we started to plan routes where we live in a town where there are lots and lots of pavement slabs that aren't particularly even because of all the trees. And so I had to look quite carefully to see which were the best paths to walk along. And then when some of that walking became difficult, we used to go around our local park, which had a very, very good flat surface. and that was much safer. Once it was difficult for Peter to actually walk to the park, I then used to drive to the park, but then I had to make sure that I didn't park near a curb, because getting out of the car onto a curb was difficult. And sometimes you then had to move the car twice, which sometimes would be a bit of a worry. But actually walking and looking at best routes, we still found, you know, sometimes some of the routes we did every day were quite simple, they were local, and they were around a park that we enjoyed going to. So we perhaps didn't have the huge variety of walks that we used to go on, but we still have plenty of things to look at and talk about. So that seemed to work quite well for us.
Thank you. I saw you nodding along a lot there, Martina, and I just wondered if that fits with your experience.
Yeah, totally, and particularly the curb experiences. And I was advised pretty early on to sort of avoid even escalators, because the actual stepping on and stepping off was becoming significantly difficult, you know, much more difficult. And with the curb issue, because I'm fairly independent, I'm never worried about asking for help, but I want to keep going as long as I can. So what I actually did was I went to a local blind society shop, and I've got, along with my SOS button in my backpack, I have a very thin fold up white cane. So on the days that I actually feel that my vision isn't what it should be, or I know that I'm seeing things that are slightly out of place, you know, I whip that out and I can feel where it is, and I can feel the height, and I have a better understanding of knowing where I can step to or not fall off. And strangely enough, again, it's lovely to hear Val speaking about these experiences, because it makes me feel better that some of what I'm experiencing is actually marrying up with other people's experiences, and that is so important. And yes, I would then learn, you know, avoid that area, avoid those curves, avoid those pathways. And so I'm getting a better outdoors experience because of constantly wanting to learn, so I can actually keep going. And I just look at all these little aids that I've got as they are aids, which just keep me going.
Sorry, may I just add to that, Martina? And that's interesting to hear that. Peter did have a stick actually, but for his arthritis. So actually he was often feeling his way along, and sometimes he'd stop and poke things to check, you know, it wasn't going to go down into a chasm that, you know, he thought was there that other people didn't. And that was something that was quite difficult for him. I think the only time we were really caught out for a walking experience was we were on holiday in Madeira, and the sun was shining, it was coming through trees, and we were walking on a mosaic path. And I didn't think about it at the time. Started going, Peter just stopped and said, I don't quite know what I can see. I said, okay, right, what do you want to do? So he said, I think I'm just going to close my eyes a minute and see if it'll change, but it didn't. So then we said, what do you do next? So he said, I think if I close my eyes, or if I just hold your hand and we walk away. So we then had to find another path. But, you know, again, you just have to constantly look at changes, adapting, as you said, and be flexible and try and see if there's another way that you can do things, which you've all said all along. So thank you. Just an aside.
Thank you, Val. That's really helpful. And just as you were saying, Martina, that it's reassuring to hear from Val and know that your experiences marry up. I'm sure that there's lots of people at home also nodding along, feeling reassured that their experiences match up with both of yours. So that's really, I guess, what we're trying to do in these meetings and in RDS generally, is to kind of bring people together and share those common experiences. Okay, so the next question, I'm just going to read this one out if that's okay. So someone has shared, my mother has PCA. She was diagnosed 3 years ago and first displayed symptoms about 7 years ago. I would say that she is about at stage 6 right now. The greatest challenge in caring for her now is physical. In the past year, her neck has become stiff and painful and her gait has changed. She shuffles and is increasingly knock-kneed. She also has a very strong grasp reflex that is challenging to manage. She wants to hold someone's hand whenever she can, but she squeezes so much that she causes pain to her carers, my dad included. Is there anything we can do to ease these physical symptoms? We had a fabulous physiotherapist who was coming twice a week before the pandemic and was helping my mum regain some of her mobility. We hope she will return soon. Could I come to you, Ross, for any thoughts about that grasp reflex in particular?
Yeah, so just thinking about that story a little bit, it does sound like what you're describing might be this grasp reflex, which is an automatic response, which can often appear towards the later stages of any degenerative condition like PCA. And whenever the palm of the hand is stimulated, then people are inclined to squeeze, and it's often difficult or unpredictable when they'll let go. So it may be that's being described. I have to say I don't have a great deal of experience in this, but a quick review of the medical literature suggests that orthotic splints in the hand can be helpful in that situation to keep people's hands open and to stop them getting contractures. So that's just when the hand sort of seizes closed. But also thinking about what might trigger that situation, and that reflex is often triggered by any stimulation in the palm of the hand. So if you can find a way of opening the hand passively to keep the hand moving without actually stimulating the palm, then you might avoid that situation. But I agree, it is a difficult thing, and you can definitely get stuck with somebody holding your hand so tight that you can't get away. That's definitely happened to me when I've been testing patients at the bedside.
Thank you, Ross. That's very helpful. Oh, Seb, yeah, did you want to add?
I was just going to add as well, it sounds as though the person asking the question has a very clear sense that this is happening because it's something to do with the condition, not that their mum is deliberately grabbing and hurting someone. But I think it is worth perhaps for others and for explaining perhaps to other people who don't know your mum so well and other people who maybe have similar situations, so just to think about why also what the background to why this might be happening. So for example, for me, when I'm healthy, it would be very, very difficult for me to squeeze someone so hard that I hurt them without me knowing it. And that's partly because I would have my normal sensory feedback from my hand. I would know that it was, if I was squeezing someone that hard, I was really feeling a lot of pressure on my fingers. And I know in PCA that the processing of that kind of sensory information is definitely changing, because the parietal lobes, which are particularly by PCA, are very, very important in that process. That's the sort of sensory part of our brain. But also, if I was squeezing someone that hard that they were in pain, I would see their facial expression change. I would hear little squawks or words that expressed discomfort. And again, for someone, particularly in the later stages of PCA, it's difficult to put all those bits of information together. Certainly very difficult to read subtle facial expressions. So it's just, I just mention it to say that it's so easy, not just in this situation, but in others as well, for people in the later stages of PCA to do things that someone who doesn't know the person very well and doesn't know the situation that the condition that they're dealing with very well, to make assumptions about why someone's doing something and to think, oh, that person's very spiteful, or they're hurting me on purpose. You know, those sorts of pejorative thoughts and assumptions. And it's always good to kind of check those and try to reassure or explain to people that that's happened, but it's not an intentional action.
Thank you, Seb. That's really helpful. I know that can come up quite a lot as well in PCA in terms of not seeing things. So maybe if someone is asked to pass something across the table, it may be easy to think that they're being deliberately difficult or something to not do that, but it may just be that they're not seeing the thing that's right in front of them. Obviously, and I think you're so right that that's the kind of stuff that families and friends and carers who really know that person very well can pick up perhaps much more easily than someone who isn't familiar, and always worth sharing that knowledge. There's a question for you now, Martina, if that's okay. So someone has said they really appreciated your comment in the last session about laughing and finding the humour in things. And they've asked if you live alone and if you could say anything about how your living situation maybe affects your coping and managing.
Yeah, you know, I'm a great fan of laughing. You know, I can't help it. I laugh at myself, and sometimes if I'll say something about PCA or I've done something that I just appear a complete plank, and I laugh at myself. And you know, sometimes the reaction from other people is, you know, why are you laughing? This is serious. And I say, yeah, I know it is, but I just carry on. I just smile, you know. To me, it just lifts me. Yeah, I don't have a partner or a spouse, so I don't have the level of support a lot of people have. But equally, there's a lot of people that do live on their own that do have PCA and other rare dementias. I do share a property though, so with a good friend, and we've known each other for a lot of years. So she does support as much as she can, but she's 73 herself and has had a pacemaker fitted. So I don't see that as I can't rely on that as a high level of support. And I think that if you are in a situation, and I may be completely wrong, this is just my opinion, but if you are in a situation where you don't have that closeness or togetherness of being with somebody, you do have a different level of expectations and expectations of yourself, and also what you need to try and keep achieving if you possibly can. It's not that you're replacing that lack of togetherness, but you're recognizing that you know, don't feel sorry for yourself. This is how I feel, that you haven't got that you've been dealt this hand, and therefore you have to find ways or mechanisms of dealing with it. And RDS and the support I've had from this community has been absolutely first class. And I think one of the biggest things that I found of a real benefit is the non-judgmental approach that everybody has, you know, because out there in the big wide world, we do have this judgmental attitude. I was with somebody yesterday, they were doing a radio interview. It's only a 3-minute slot, and I do audio diaries for Radio Cumbria. And again, I do them ad hoc with no pressure on me. And I was explaining to her, and I know her quite well now, I've known just through the radio, and about the issues with, say, eating out. And I said to her, I've reached a stage where at times, if I know I'm not quite functioning as I should, I will tuck a napkin into my t-shirt or what have you. And I said, so I know that I will catch whatever, you know, but I think my mouth is here, but actually my mouth is slightly there, you know, so it's like hand-eye coordination thing. And she said, I said, how would you feel if you were with me? She said, if I didn't know, she said, obviously I would feel embarrassed and wouldn't know what to do. But she said, now that I know, she said, I would feel better about it and I would be able to deal with it better. And living alone, it doesn't really matter if the spaghetti bolognese actually stains your new white t-shirt, you know, you're just dealing with it. Living with somebody, they can help you deal with it, and they can take some of that emotion away, that the minute that the bolognese sauce drops down your new white t-shirt, that you feel as a person that is pretty much living alone. They're completely different situations. So I also figure that anybody that just totally live alone will have additional expectations of themselves or additional things that get them down, because it is a very, very different feeling when you put your key in the door and you turn it and there's nothing there. And one of the best things that I have done, thanks to the lovely lady in the stripy shirt there, is my lovely Louis, because I felt I couldn't. I felt it was irresponsible of me, but he has changed my life, because there is a certain level of loneliness with my PCA that it is actually, it hasn't dissipated, but this unconditional love from this big old polar bear, it just goes such a long way. And of course, he's not my husband, spouse, partner, or anything else, but he's a really good mate, a really, really good mate. So am I angry or annoyed that I'm in my later years and I don't have a husband or a spouse? Life happens, just like the PCA has happened. You know, I just get on with it the best way I can. So, you know, that's it really. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Martina. And just, yeah, so helpful to think about those other types of connections and relationships and how important those can be. And yeah, I'm sure a lot is resonating for a lot of people tuning in. Al, did you want to add something to that? I just noticed that you'd unmuted.
Yes, sorry, I didn't mute myself actually, so I was muted by Roberta. So no, sorry, I didn't unmute.
Okay, sorry. Battling with technology still after all these months. And thank you everyone for bearing with us. Okay, if I could come to Ross next with a more clinical question now. So someone has asked, please could you let me know if people with PCA are more likely to develop seizures or epilepsy?
So I think the short answer to that is probably yes, and that's related to the stage of the condition that you're in. So the risk of epilepsy goes up as you progress through the condition, and this has been something that's been under-recognised for quite a long time, but there is now pretty good evidence to show that up to a third of people with Alzheimer's disease, particularly in the later stages, have got some epileptic changes in the brain and an increased tendency towards seizures. So extrapolating that to PCA, the answer is probably yes.
Sorry. The next question I was going to, it's not really a question, it's more of a continuation of what we were talking about in the last session about PCA not just being about vision, so also hearing problems, and also thinking about testing and how doing tests when you have a rarer condition like this can be quite challenging. So I'll just read out the comment and then invite some reflections if that's okay. So someone has said, my wife was diagnosed as needing hearing aids. I don't think she had a problem with physical deafness. I think that because she couldn't do the test properly, it was more to do with her inability to do the tests because of her PCA. Could I come to you, Seb? Is that okay for some thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I certainly think it's true that we talk about vision in PCA most. Some people even describe it as visual dementia. But it's very clear, both from, most importantly, the comments of support group members, but also from the scientific literature increasingly, that it's not. It's a condition which affects the back of the brain and every type of skill which is dependent on that back of the brain. And we know that in research done by Jason Warren, Chris Hardy, Tia Young, and others, that different aspects of hearing are definitely affected in people with PCA, and that ranges from very basic. So there's a test pure tone audiometry, which is a geeky way of saying single noises, both high and low pitched, played very quietly and then increasingly loudly, and you just have to say as soon as you hear something. And people with PCA do find that test more difficult than their age-matched peers who don't have PCA, and actually more difficult than people with typical Alzheimer's as well, suggesting that the parts of the brain that process that kind of sound signal are relatively more affected in PCA than typical memory-led AD. But it's not just that sort of basic aspect of hearing that can become affected. It's also hearing where sounds are coming from. So Jason and his team did some tests where people wore special headphones that simulated a 3D sound environment. So they could, for example, play people sounds that were either sounded like they were still in one, coming from one place, or which moved around. Or other tests where people would be played two sounds, which either came from the same, sounded like they came from the same place, or which sounded like they came from two different places. And people, again, with PCA found those tests particularly difficult. So just as we talk about difficulty seeing what and seeing where things are, I think equally people with PCA can have difficulty hearing what and hearing where things are. That doesn't, of course, mean it is necessarily the ear that's at fault. It can be in a lot of people that it's the processing of those sensory signals coming into the brain that's the problem. And that will vary a bit depending upon people's age. Of course, it's entirely possible to have a hearing problem and PCA. And it will depend a bit on the stage of the condition as well, as to which aspects of hearing are affected. But the bottom line is, I think it's entirely reasonable to expect that if you have a diagnosis of PCA, it be not just your vision, but also your hearing, your sensory processing, and other forms of interpreting information coming into us from the world around us, which can be affected. Sorry, I just thought the issue of testing is just, of course, so yes, of course, also as well, there's an impact upon how questions are asked. For all of us, but particularly perhaps for people with PCA, the way in which the question is asked or how complicated it is would have a bearing. And so I'm sure, just as people have had good and bad experiences of optometrists deciding whether they need a new set of glasses, then there would be ways, better and worse ways of administering tests of hearing. And I think generally speaking, the simpler the tests can be, so particularly when someone is asked to make a sort of a yes-no judgment about one sound or one thing, is much more likely to give you a reliable read than if you are presented with multiple things and have to hold those things in mind and then make choices between them. So as much as possible, just as for example, optometrists and ophthalmologists have been learning to test how good people with PCA are at seeing small things, not by presenting one of those standard Snellen vision charts, which have lots of letters, big and small, but just presenting one letter at a time, then similar adaptations are ideally needed in the hearing testing process.
Great, thank you, Seb. And I know last time we spoke a bit about going for tests with optometrists or ophthalmologists as well. And I just wondered, Livy, if members are coming up to tests like that, or if there are professionals watching who might be delivering tests like that, is that something that people can get in touch with the direct support team about for any advice or to check in?
Absolutely. So any advice or support in terms of either getting a test or advice for professionals who are conducting tests, feel free to get in contact. I think I mentioned last time, but over the last year, we have seen a significant increase in healthcare professionals signing up to Rare Dementia Support for that advice and support from ourselves, which has been amazing to see. So of course, feel free to pop along any emails or questions that you may have about testing.
If I can also say, looking back briefly to the comment earlier about the person who'd had the physiotherapist helping them before lockdown, if you have professionals that you've been working with who have been understanding and thoughtful and creative about how Sorry, can you hear me or not hear me? I'll just start that again if that's okay. So I was just going to say, linking back to the earlier question about or earlier situation of someone who had a physiotherapist working with them before lockdown, it's really helpful for us if you have met a professional, be it an audiologist in this case, or a physiotherapist who's willing to talk to them about their experiences of working with you and the ways in which they may have had to change their practices a little bit or the way they do things in order to suit you, then we'd be really pleased to hear about that, because Chris Hardy, our RDS education lead, and other members of the team are really keen to put together packs of information and training resources for other professionals from a variety of different backgrounds to say how best they can adapt their skills to help people with PCA and other rare dementias. So please do have a word with a professional, and if you're both willing, for example, to have a quick interview or a quick phone call with us, that'd be really helpful.
Great, thank you. And this next question now then is about a sort of practical day-to-day issue, and I wondered if we could come to you, Seb, maybe for a bit of understanding about why this might be a problem, and then we'll come to you, Martina, for some tips about your experience, if that's okay. So the particular issue is when shopping, having difficulty with using the card pin pad machines. This person is saying that her sister has trouble, if she can remember the pin, it sometimes takes her too long to punch it in. And in addition, she can't always see the slot for her card to go into for items that are over a kind of contactless limit. So yeah, Seb, would you be able to say a little bit about why those things might be difficult?
Yes, so I think there, for example, putting a card in a slot, I think most people would expect that might be difficulty seeing where the hole is, but also detecting it, seeing where it is precisely in order to coordinate the eye, but also being able to perceive the orientation correctly. And even things like getting the card the right way around in your fingers requires not just visual information, but a lot of complicated kind of feedback and adjustment in terms of your physical sensation. And I think card machines, particularly machines when you've got to remember the number, is not just the holding the number in mind, which people who don't know anything about PCA would expect to be difficult for someone who broadly has got a dementia label. People think dementia equals memory. So even if you can, beyond remembering the number, you then got to turn that into a sequence of physical actions, all of which require you to see a particular location of a button. So I guess this is one of many, many examples of how what many of us take for granted in everyday life and consider to be a very simple or automatic task, PCA reveals quite how complicated, how many tiny micro stages and decisions and different skills and abilities and sensations are required to actually get from the beginning to the end of that what would normally be a very short task. And take one example of a keypad and numbers, which people would also have difficulty with in relation to things like mobile phones or telephone dialing. Many people would just say, oh, just close your eyes and do it from memory. But of course, some number pads are in different spatial arrangements. And even if it was an arrangement you knew really well, even if it was your phone or your local cash register, actually in PCA, it's not just your explicit vision, your vision of things that are around you, but it's also the more internal processes of visual imagery, the ability that the rest of us have to consult an image in our mind and let that guide us, guide our actions. So I could imagine a number plate, a number keypad in my mind and let that direct my fingers top left, bottom right. For someone PCA, that would be very, very difficult.
Thank you, Seb. And Martina, is this something you've sort of dealt with or have any wisdom about?
Yeah, I think the first time I realised that and against the size of a keypad was supermarket trolley and trying to know where to put that coin in, and that was a real sort of panic moment for me because nothing seemed to work. So I learned very quickly that touch and feel for me has helped a huge amount. So I can run my hand along the supermarket trolley. I always so I don't have to try and carry out the physical activity of getting my purse, unzipping it, getting the coin out. In my trousers, I keep a £1 coin, in my coat, whatever I know that I wear regularly. So I've performed a habit of actions, and I found forming those habit of actions has really helped. So now if I'm struggling with a supermarket trolley, what I do is I run my hand up, know where it is, know where my coin is, my thumb will guide where the hole is, and the coin goes in, and Bob's your uncle. With the keypad thing, again, I've found for me, I know these things don't work for everybody, but shapes. Change your pin, and as you've just said, you can't visualize. It's difficult to hold those pictures in your head now, or sometimes whenever it happens. And so what I found is really useful, again, it's a sensory thing. Where is the slot? Where does my card go? I feel for it. When it's difficult, I feel for it and I find it, and I'll put my hand there, and then it'll come down and my hand guides it into it. Again, I know that's performing some actions, but it works for me. With the keypad itself, I will think of and I've changed my pin, and you can think of a shape. It might be a square, but whatever is easy for you to retain, think of that shape, and then make your pin that shape, because you're holding it. You can find the keypad. You know it's the square. You know in your head you like a diamond. You know what you like, because it's something that appeals to you. And I use my hands. On the days that it is really, really difficult and I've got problems, then I will actually use the touch sense, sensory, and I will, in my head, I know it's a square, and I know what those 4 digits are on that square. I don't know if any of that makes sense. In Martina's world, it kind of works.
That makes loads of sense. That's really helpful. Thank you. Livy, did you want to add something on to that?
Yes, just to follow on from those amazing responses there. So contactless cards. So HSBC and I'm sure a lot of other banks use contactless debit cards that work at card machines throughout the UK, allowing you to pay for anything under £30 just with a tap. These payments are safe and secure, so there's absolutely no need for you to enter your PIN. And for extra security, you might be asked to put your PIN in at some point in the future. Also, if you're a person who finds that signing is easier, chip and signature cards still do exist. So chip and signature cards can be useful, especially if you have difficulty remembering a PIN, and that's where you can provide a signature to make your payment instead of popping in a PIN. And but just to remind you that these chip and signature cards do not work at ATM machines. It is something that you'd have to go into a bank to do. And then finally, if you're finding that cards are very, very difficult, then it's always something to consider maybe taking away those cards and having actual paper money. And that can sometimes be a lot easier for people paying for things with paper money rather than using cards if they've become a bit too difficult. So that's all I was wanting to add there.
I was just going to add in, if it's okay, the sort of social element to this about kind of getting help. I've heard a lot of people at the support group talk about, certainly with paper money, often favouring familiar shops where they might become known, where they feel they can trust someone to, if they get their purse out, they can trust the person behind the cash desk to get out the right notes and give them the right change, or to take their card and tap it on the contactless device for them. And I guess another thing related to that is a number of people use these symbol canes, so short white canes that aren't that you don't use to physically tap along the ground in front of you as someone who's visually impaired might, but which are a visual cue to others that you may need some help because of a visual sight challenge. And obviously there are now these schemes like the sunflower lanyards that lots of people are wearing to indicate nothing specific to dementia, but to indicate that you have some kind of hidden challenge or disability with which you might need help. And those are the kind of cues to other people just to be a bit more ready to offer you a bit of help with different forms of payment, obviously, if you trust them.
Great, thank you, Seb, and all three of you there for a really kind of multi-pronged answer to that. So it's one thing to understand, obviously, the systems and what's difficult, but also to know, like you were saying, Martina, your particular strengths and what you need help with and how your specific needs are affected. And as you've touched on, Livy, and said, knowing what support is out there and from who. Hopefully, if we can provide that kind of approach to lots of different problems, we can really help people with strategizing. One other question now was about from someone whose wife with PCA is in a nursing home. And he said the nursing home has avoided COVID so far, but how can I get them to pay more attention to the very negative effects of a lack of stimulation? It's become almost a worse threat than COVID itself. It's a wider issue for everyone in this boat, and any increase on publicity about this would help. Livy, could I come to you for any help we might be able to provide in that region?
Yes, of course. It's a very difficult question because, of course, at the current time, care homes' main priority is keeping things COVID-free, and we are seeing a rise in cases again. So I can understand that care homes are having difficulties with this. What I would suggest is having an open conversation with the care home and also ask what the care homes have been doing, and you might be surprised. Within the direct support team here, we've been hearing some amazing things that the care homes have been doing during COVID. So, for example, some poetry and other great activities with safety measures in place, so with that distancing in place to keep everybody safe. I think it would be also good to direct you to the COVID resources that we do have on the Rare Dementia Support website that were put together as a team, which have some activities which can be so if, for example, different things to do online, different things to keep people stimulated during lockdown. So that is on our website. But it's as much as thinking what the person within a care home can do, what they enjoy, and what the care homes can do. And I think as well, it's important to add that our amazing colleague Ada has done some research and has created some resources on lack of stimulation in care homes that we'll be sharing alongside this recording today. So if that might be of help as well.
If it's okay for me, sorry to jump in. It's obviously, I completely endorse and agree with all of that. I guess our own individual responses to this awful situation that so many people find themselves in will be partly personal, partly social, partly political. There are obviously organisations campaigning for change and greater awareness of this difficulty. So organisations like John's campaign, run by Nikki Gerard and Julia Jones, who are actively campaigning and even considering taking legal action over specific issues like whether some family members could be given special carer status or kind of critical key worker status in order to be able to get access to relatives who they've been separated from for a long time, obviously following COVID safe guidelines. So I think as RDS, the thing we can do most powerfully is to share your stories. If you have positive stories of how you've managed to address this, like Livy was saying, where care homes that you know and interact with have been creative and responsive to enabling you to maintain contact, then we'd love to hear those. But we also need to be able to share the stories of the costs of not having that social connection, some of which are general to anyone separated from a loved one. Some of them are specific to the challenges you're facing living with a rare dementia. So, for example, where Skype, video calls are less appropriate for someone in a care home living with PCA. So please do share your stories, and if you trust us to, and if it's okay with you, we will try and use those judiciously to support different campaigns and organisations to make people as aware of this as they can be, because it's going to be a situation that's sadly with us for a long time.
Thank you, Seb and Livy. And just to add to that, in the vein of sharing your stories and experiences, some of you will know we ran a survey about the impacts of lockdown on the RDS membership. And we had 185 of you responding in quite a short amount of time, offering some really helpful information about exactly how you have been affected. And so we're processing that data at the moment. And just to say as well that some of those questions were around strategies and any surprising kind of positives that you have managed to find in this situation. And we're really keen to kind of condense what we found and to share it back to you. So again, you know, if your experience is kind of resonating with others. And so, yeah, that's going on in the background, and we hope to be able to come back to you with some of those results soon, as well as obviously sharing them with the relevant parties, so we can hopefully enforce some change. So that's all of our questions for today. I just wanted to finish with a comment from a member, and which seems like a nice note to end on. They said, many thanks to you all for a great meeting, and special thanks to Martina and Val for sharing your personal experiences. And I'm sure, yeah, that's echoed by many others watching. So just wanted to thank our brilliant panel again for coming back together to answer those further questions, and I think it's a really unique opportunity to have these different expertise from different disciplines in one place. So thank you all for that. Thank you everyone again for sending in your questions, and to Roberta, who's helping behind the scenes with the recording of this. And just to remind you that if anything's come up that you want to follow up with one-to-one, the direct support team, so Livy, who's here, as well as Claire and Nikki, are always available to provide one-to-one support. And you can contact them at the email address contact@raredementiasupport.org, and they'll be glad to help. And yeah, just a big thank you to you all again, our panelists, and we'll say goodbye for now, but we'll be in touch again soon. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.